Good morning and welcome to our March 2023 Law and Regulation Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order and have our clerk call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Here.
Councilmember Mendonça.
Here.
Everyone is present.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call on Blair, our city clerk technician, to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Blair. At this time, I will open it up for public comments. As a reminder, public comment at this time is for any item that is not currently listed on the agenda for this morning's meeting. Seeing none, I will close public comment. And at this time, we will move to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, we have no minutes to approve, so we will move on to number 6 on our agenda, reports and comments. And I see that we have Mark Wawinski and Rob Becerra joining us, so welcome.
Thank you. And so the first item, this item is an overview of the California Business Roundtable anti-local control measure that is qualified for the November 2024 ballot. And staff requests the committee's recommendation to bring this item forward to the full City Council for their consideration to adopt a resolution explaining how harmful this measure would be to Roseville and other communities throughout California. By way of background, the California Business Roundtable's anti-local control measure qualified for the November 2024 ballot. The measure includes provisions that would make it more difficult for local voters to pass measures needed to fund local services and projects. The measure jeopardizes vital local and state services and puts at risk billions of dollars currently dedicated to critical state and local services. If passed, it could force cuts to services such as fire and emergency response, law enforcement, public health, parks, libraries, and other important municipal programs and services. Furthermore, it's extremely concerning that the measure includes a provision that would retroactively cancel measures that were passed by local voters in 2022, thereby effectively undermining the rights of voters to decide the needs of their community. A recent analysis of the initiative by the California City Finance, an organization that provides data, statistics, and analysis of California city and county finances, found that the retroactive provision defined in the initiative would, quote, jeopardize over 100 local measures that were approved in 2022 and would therefore likely not comply with the provisions of the initiative, unquote. In addition, quote, voters approved 106 measures in June 2022 and November 2020 of the same year that do not provide a specific duration of time that the tax will be imposed or an end date, unquote. The results of this means they will expire a year after the effective date of the initiative if the initiative passes. And finally, taken together, these approved local measures would generate nearly $561 million per year in the communities where they were passed. With respect to Roseville's Measure C, it would be put in immediate risk. The measure was approved by 72% of voters and is anticipated to generate an additional $3 million annually by raising the hotel tax paid by people who stay in hotels and short-term rentals in city limits. The city's hotel and lodge tax had remained unchanged at 6% for 47 years, while demand for city services, including from visitors, has increased, along with the number of hotels from 4 hotels to currently 17. The city may use revenues from this measure for any general unrestricted multiple purpose, including but not limited to essential services such as 911 emergency response, repairing potholes in streets, neighborhood police patrols, fire protection, addressing blight, maintaining existing and future city amenities, economic development, job creation, and other general government services. In addition, hotel and lodging tax generated by the City of Roseville stays in Roseville and cannot be taken by the state of California or federal government. This initiative would remove voters' ability to weigh in on these types of financial decisions in cities and counties throughout the state. Other significant changes defined in the initiative include state taxes, where all new or increased state taxes would require a majority voter approval. Local taxes, new requirements for voter approval, such as when an existing tax is applied to a newly annexed territory, or all new and increased taxes adopted after January 1st, 2022, must include a sunset date. With respect to fees and charges for services and permits may not exceed the actual cost of providing the product or service for which the fee is charged. Actual cost is the minimum amount necessary. State and cities have a burden of proof by providing clear and convincing evidence that a fee charge is not a tax and that the amount is reasonable and that it does not exceed the actual cost. And no fee or charge or exaction regulating vehicle miles traveled can be imposed on new development. And then with respect to fines and penalties, they may require voter approval of fines and penalties for corporations and property owners that violate state and local laws unless a new, undefined adjudicatory process is used to impose the fines and penalties. Examples include nuisance abatement, organic waste reduction requirements, and failure to maintain a vacant property. So in conclusion, this far-reaching measure puts at risk billions of dollars currently dedicated to critical state and local services. The initiative limits voters' authority, adopts new and stricter rules for raising taxes and fees, and may make it more difficult to hold violators of state and local laws accountable. Ultimately, the measure severely restricts voters' input and diminishes local taxing authority and the ability of voters to determine what is best and necessary for their communities. And this concludes my presentation, and as I said in the beginning, staff requests the committee's recommendation to bring the item forward to the full council for their full consideration.
Thank you, Mark. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
I fully support the recommendation and have no idea how this can come forward with a straight face from anyone, really. So, yeah, full council can weigh in on it.
Very concerning. Thank you for addressing and bringing this to our attention, Mark. We will move on to 6.2, our state and federal priority legislation. Public comment.
No.
I will open it up now for public comment. If anybody would like to speak on this item. None, I will close public comment. And we will now move on to item 6.2, our state and federal priority legislation for March 2023. And we'll turn it back over to Mark and Rob.
Okay. Thank you again, Chair Mondanza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. And I'm joined for this presentation by Rob Becerra, the Police Public Information Officer. So the state legislature has introduced more than 2,600 bills the first year of the two-year session. And the following report includes an overview of several of the bills in areas of particular concern, with a focus on public safety, homelessness, housing, and then at the federal level, a brief summary of the debt ceiling limit discussions. And at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Rob, who will provide the brief overview on public safety.
Thank you, Mark. As we have seen over the last few sessions, the legislature continues to put forth just a significant number of bills that would directly impact our operations and impact our police department. So today I'm going to cover three things. One, trends we've identified at this early stage in the process. Just a reminder of the tracking categories that we use as we take the pieces of legislation and break them down a little bit more. And then I'm going to call to attention three bills that we have identified right now that we wanted to bring forward and just make you aware of. To date, the government relations team has identified over 200 pieces of legislation that we're putting into a greater area of focus, specifically for public safety. We wanted to highlight some of the trends that we are seeing at this time, specifically around homeless encampments, attempting to navigate where those can occur and potential penalties for individuals who put encampments in certain areas, controlled substances, potential enhancements for criminal charging for individuals who sell controlled substances. Police officer training, we obviously follow suit with the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Trainings. Over the years, we have seen increased authority go to this group with the charge of accountability for officers. There are more pieces of legislation this year being put on post and will likely have some ramifications down the line. Shoplifting, increasing penalties for prior convictions, and we're seeing a lot coming out on gun safety. That is, one specifically is a new inspection process if you purchase a firearm out of state and you bring it into California. Next, I just wanted to go over very quickly our tracking categories that we use in a way to break down legislation so we can put a greater emphasis on what those primary issues are. We have 7 categories that we have, and you can move to the next slide. The 7 categories that we use currently are homeless response, mental health crisis response, substance abuse and fentanyl overdoses, organized retail crime, firearms or ghost guns, law enforcement hiring reform, hate crimes, and criminal sentencing. Consistently, we have seen over the years, these are the primary issues that come out, and most of the legislation we track falls into one of these categories. We specifically wanted to call out the top 3 issues that we have, which is homeless response, mental health crisis response, and then substance abuse and fentanyl. This is largely driven by our patrol team, but moreover, specifically our social services unit, who is working with individuals on the street, and again, a large working group with our homeless population. The last thing that I'll go over is just 3 pieces of legislation that fall suit in the trends that we are seeing, and I'll give you just a brief update on them as I roll through. So AB 1708 is specific to trying to undo many of the things that we saw enacted with Prop 47 and criminal resentencing. This bill by Marisucci is actually endorsed and supported by Cal Chiefs. Right now, it is not looking good. It is stalled a bit in the Public Safety Committee, but the hope is that it will be able to continue to move forward. But it refines the definition of shoplifting. It's probably the most dramatic move we've seen to undo some of the things that Prop 47 and AB 109 did several years back. SB 14 is moving the crime of human trafficking, re-identifying it as a serious felony, and this is currently supported by the police department. We do believe this would be a good move if this bill went forward, just to be able to hold those involved in human trafficking more accountable for their crimes. And then the final bill we'll discuss is by our local senator, Senator Nilo, SB 316. And again, this is on the trend of undoing some of the things that we saw with Prop 47, specifically related to shoplifting. And this increases the penalties for prior crimes. We are in support of this bill as well and tracking obviously a number, but AB 1708 specifically to theft and SB 316 in hopes that we can get some relief with the consistent trend of shoplifting that we see here in our business community. At this time, that's all that I have. If you have any questions, take questions, Mark, or you want to go back to you?
I'll go back, and then we'll
Deal.
take questions at the end.
Let's do it.
Okay. Yep, awesome. Okay. And so then with respect to homelessness, I have several bills to report out. As we know, homelessness continues to be a critical issue for communities throughout the state. In his 2023-24 state budget proposal, the governor has proposed spending an additional $3.4 billion on homelessness. And the following are several bills that of particular interest to the city at this point. Senate Bill 31, this bill would prohibit persons from sitting, lying, sleeping, or storing, using, maintaining, or placing personal property upon any street or sidewalk or other public right-of-way within 1,000 feet of a sensitive area. So we've taken a watch position on this bill and are interested in understanding whether the bill gains any traction in the legislature. Furthermore, it would be important to understand what amendments are taken and if they may provide any value to the city's strategies and programs to address encampments. Assembly Bill 284, it's the Department of Housing and Community Development. This would require a report from the Department of Housing and Community Development, including an evaluation on the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program. So we've taken a support position on this bill as it would provide valuable information on the effectiveness of housing programs administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development, which would help inform possible options for the city to explore for housing opportunities. With respect to AB 799, the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, we're watching this bill, which would enact the Homeless Accountability Act, which is to provide ongoing grant funds to support regional coordination and expand on development of local capacity to address homelessness. The city has taken a watch position on this bill to better understand what new opportunities might exist to help those that are unhoused in Roseville if the bill were enacted. Assembly Bill 550, the homelessness public hearings, we've taken an opposed unless amended position on this bill. This bill would require a city and/or a county on before January 1st, 2025, and annually thereafter to conduct a point-in-time count, and then to hold a public hearing to present data gathered and discuss plans to solve issues related to homelessness in that jurisdiction. And then, within 6 months after the public hearing, to develop a plan to reduce homelessness in that jurisdiction. So we've taken an opposed unless position amendment on the position due to the mandate that it would place on cities for work it is currently undertaking to address homelessness. And then finally, Senate Bill 63, the Behavioral Health Continuum Infrastructure Program. We've taken a watch position on this bill to understand the benefits the bill might provide to the city and Placer County with the efforts to address homelessness with respect to mental health issues. With respect to housing, as evidenced by the number of bills introduced on housing, the legislature has once again made housing a central policy focus for the current legislative session. Assembly Bill 1317, unbundled parking. The city has taken an opposed position on the bill. This bill would require the owner of a residential real property that provides parking with a residential unit to unbundle parking from the price of rent. We've taken the opposed position on the bill because it would require the owner of the property to unbundle parking, which is the practice of selling or leasing parking spaces separate from the lease of the residential use. This creates a condition where residents would be charged for parking when the city requires that it's provided by the project. The only result of this will be that residents of the property will decline the parking and instead will park in neighboring streets. Senate Bill 393, it's an Environmental Quality Act, Judicial Watch, and we're watching this bill. This bill would require a plaintiff or a petitioner in an action brought related to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, to disclose the identity of petitioner's cost of disclose the identity of a person or entity that contributes in excess of $1,000 toward the plaintiff's or petitioner's cost of the action. We've taken a support position on this bill as frivolous CEQA lawsuits can be detrimental to various types of projects that are important to the community and the city. Staff will continue to research and monitor the bill to understand in greater detail what impacts the bill might have on these types of CEQA actions. Senate Bill 482, the Multifamily Housing Program, supportive housing. We've taken a watch position on the bill. The bill would require the Department of Housing and Community Development to offer capitalized operating reserves to support housing units developed under this program. We've taken this watch position and will continue to research the bill in more detail to better understand the benefits it might provide in the development and construction of multifamily housing projects. And then finally, Senate Bill 794, by Senator Nilo, the California Environmental Quality Act. We've taken a support position on this bill. The bill would require an action of proceeding brought to attack, review, set aside, void, or annul acts or decisions of a public agency for a commercial, housing, or public works project that helps to address longstanding critical needs in the project area, and that results in the investment of a specified sum in the state on the grounds of noncompliance with the CEQA to be resolved to the extent feasible within 365 days. As I've said, we support the bill because it would allow an action to occur, but it would require the action to be completed within 365 days of the filing, if at all possible. This change would possibly help to minimize actions that are without merit and help communities construct projects designed to meet critical needs in their communities. And then with respect to the debt limit, in January, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sent a letter to the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy announcing that the government hit the debt ceiling and would begin taking extraordinary measures to conserve cash in order to prevent a default on the nation's debt. Congress and the White House are not in agreement on the steps forward, but some negotiations have begun. However, recently, a group of U.S. House conservatives issued demands that said that they must be met before they would agree to vote to raise the debt ceiling. The House Freedom Caucus list includes drastic cuts in federal spending, a return to Clinton-era work requirements for public assistance, and an end to federal regulations and subsidies on domestic energy production. The action taken by the group seems to suggest that they might want to act as a separate faction, which could be complicating to Speaker McCarthy's path forward. He cannot afford to lose more than 4 members of his caucus on any given vote without Democratic support. The House Freedom Caucus, with around 45 members, represents more than enough votes to defeat practically any piece of legislation unless the Speaker strikes a deal with Democrats. Ultimately, local governments could be impacted by a default. Domestic spending, discretionary spending, which includes federal grants for local governments, is often the part of the federal budget most vulnerable to cuts. In addition, infrastructure is one area where municipalities could see support from the federal government reduced, leaving local governments to make up the gap in their budgets from reduced federal spending. Other areas that could be affected include education and housing. And this concludes our presentation, and we're prepared to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
Thank you for the information. Just a question on the homelessness, SB 31. Maybe I missed it, but can you just define what a sensitive area is and explain why the watch position?
The sensitive areas can be things such as schools, power plants. Those are the two that religious churches, those come to mind. Transportation hubs, I believe, are mentioned in the bill as well. And the reason that we've taken the watch position at this time is because of the legalities of it, and to understand, as you know, there are so many nuances and there are so many lawsuits that have been decided on homelessness and around encampments. And so we want to have the opportunity to be able to understand in more detail what the bill, where those challenges might occur and what challenges might have to be overcome by local governments. In addition, we want to understand the amendments that are taken on the bill. So as it starts to move through its hearings, to see how those may change the direction or the tenor of the bill and what it's asking to do.
Got it. Is natural resources like creeks or waterways, are those included in sensitive areas?
You know, I can't say for certain off the top of my head, but I'll research that and certainly get back to the committee.
Just curious. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I had a similar question, so thank you for that explanation, but I had one other question that tied into that. Does that bill, is it also including RVs and recreational areas, or is it strictly just pop-up tents and sleeping bags and things that would be utilized to sleep in doorways and alleyways and things like that?
At this point, my understanding of it is it's more tents and that type of encampment. But once again, when I research the bill further to get that other clarification, I can look for that clarification as well.
Now, I was just curious because I didn't think about it until your explanation, but some of those areas that you mentioned, power plants and even places of worship would have large areas of parking available. And so I just wanted to know if that would also apply to people who are, using their tenement on wheels as their permanent homes. And then it's good to see AB 1708 and SB 316 to try to relieve some of the horrible burden that Prop 47 is placing upon us. I mean, we have the largest regional mall, and we're very dependent upon that sales tax dollars. And so it's important, I think, that we continue to follow that, and if we feel necessary to support that, because we need to give those retailers a fair shot, and we certainly don't want to see a degradation of our shopping centers within our large mall. So that was very good. Okay, at this time, I'll open it up for public comment. If anybody has any public comment, please come forward now. Seeing none, I will close public comment. And we will move on to item 6.3 and welcome up our Government Relations Administrator, Amber Blix, and our Electric Utilities Director, Daniel Beans. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Mendonça, Vice Mayor Bernasconi. Regarding our electric department summary, my focus will be to cover a few of the state bond proposals that have been introduced and some legislation on renewable hydrogen in transmission facilities. After that, Amber will continue the presentation by sharing some other key electric items that our department's currently engaged in. The first bond proposal I'll be discussing is AB 1567 at $15 billion. This might be the largest bond bill, if passed, ever to be put before California voters. This bill is authored by the Chair of the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee, Mr. Eduardo Garcia. As of now, on the energy side of this bill, we've got $2.3 billion for wildfire prevention and climate risk reduction, $2.1 billion for addressing extreme heat community enhancement and resiliency, and $2.1 billion for regional climate resilience projects that address multiple risks. Our trade association, the California Municipal Utilities Association, has a support if amended position. Staff will monitor this bill and seek opportunities to participate. Senate Bill 638. This bill is authored by a key Central Valley Democrat, Senator Eggman, with also a number of other Central Valley and Delta legislators on board this bill. This $4 billion bond bill has bipartisan support, with its primary focus on funding flood control. In December of 2022, there was an update to the Central Valley Flood Plan, and this bond would provide at least 50% funding to aging Central Valley projects, such as levees, bypasses, etc. The last significant flood protection bond that was passed in California was approved over 15 years ago. CMUA currently has a favor, if amended, position on this, and we're watching it very closely. Our third and last bond bill that we're tracking is Senate Bill 867. The author is Senator Allen, who chairs the Senate Environmental Committee. This bill was introduced with no dollar amount designated for the bond. However, there is now a $4.1 billion price tag on this bill. The governor's office has released several action plans to address climate issues, and Senator Allen's bill addresses climate resiliency and protection of natural resources. For now, the bond does not include any specific amounts of funding for each of the needs and is generally very light on the details. Staff will continue to monitor this as it develops. Being early in the legislative session, we're currently watching the next two bills at a very high level. AB 324, this bill proposes to authorize the California Public Utilities Commission to expand the biomethane procurement standard, which would also include renewable hydrogen. Back in 2018, Senate Bill 1440 was passed, which authorized the CPUC to adopt biomethane procurement targets for gas utilities. This procurement standard would impact gas corporations and core gas transport agents. The goal is to help facilitate and implement a clean, renewable energy source which may help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state. The author claims that this bill will reduce the cost of expensive electrical infrastructure and will continue to monitor this legislation for potential renewable hydrogen opportunities. And the last bill I'll be sharing this morning is Senate Bill 619. This bill would expand upon last year's Assembly Bill 205, which authorizes the California Energy Commission to certify transmission projects that cost over $250 million and directs the CEC to prioritize such projects. Current transmission projects can be delayed up to 5 years, which can increase project costs by the millions. The intent of Senate Bill 619 is to help meet state climate goals and at the same time deliver more reliable power. We will continue to watch this bill and ensure that it does not grow into something that may have cost implications to the city. And with that, I will pass it on to Amber for the second part of our presentation.
Good morning, Chairman Mendonca and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. I will continue on with AB 1594 by Assemblymember Garcia. This bill is being co-sponsored by our trade associations, the California Municipal Utilities Association, the Northern California Power Agency, as well as the Southern California Public Power Authority. And this is in response to the California Air Resources Board's Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. This rule has yet to be adopted, but is in the final stages of the rulemaking process. If adopted as is, the regulation is expected to have critical impacts to the utilities fleets. The rule requires local government fleets to ensure 50% of vehicle purchases are zero-emission vehicles beginning in 2024 and 100% of vehicle purchases by 2027. Concerns remain regarding the availability and capability of this requirement with our utility fleet vehicles. AB 1594 is designed to address the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule concerns if the rule falls short, and ensures that utility vehicles can continue to maintain reliable service, respond to emergencies, and provide mutual aid services. This bill requires coordination with public agency utilities to include a list of vehicle vendors and suppliers that meet zero-emission vehicle standards and the public utilities' technical and performance requirements. The electric and environmental utilities departments support the intent of this bill and will be sending a support letter on this measure soon. The next bill, AB 538 by Assemblymember Holden, is on a multi-state regional transmission system organization. And this bill creates a pathway for California to develop a plan to form a regional transmission organization. The plan would need to be submitted to the California Energy Commission for approval. Enactment of this bill could create a significant shift in the way that California operates, and there are many questions that still remain. Our trade associations have submitted a letter to ask more detailed questions about what is being proposed and have suggested that this be a 2-year bill so that we have significant and sufficient time to work through the questions that remain. A similar bill on regionalization, also authored by Assemblymember Holden, failed the legislature a few years ago. AB 538 is likely to have similar challenges in the legislature this year. So this is one that we're continuing to watch at this point in time. And then the final item that I'll discuss is the APPA resolution on a supply chain crisis. This is to follow up from a report from last month about our travels to D.C. In early March, the electric staff traveled to Washington, D.C. with the American Public Power Association and the Northern California Power Agency to advocate for our 2023 federal priorities. Roseville was the lead sponsor of an APPA resolution on supply chain delays, and this resolution was approved by the APPA Resolutions Committee at the legislative rally and was the basis for many of our meetings with Congress. The resolution urges immediate federal efforts to address the current supply chain crisis for critical grid components, such as transformers. The department will continue to carry the message of supply chain challenges and solutions. In addition, in meeting with members of Congress in upcoming meetings. And we will include requests for funding of the Defense Production Act, working with manufacturers for solutions, and easing proposed energy efficiency standards. And with that, Chris and I are open for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Amber. Chris, Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
Other Chris? I don't have any other questions. It's just always really informative, and so I think that living in California is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. And Chris, I want to apologize. I pulled a total Ron Burgundy. I read the script instead of looking up who was coming up to the dais, so I apologize in my introduction to you.
Appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, I should look up more often instead of looking down. Thank you very much for those updates. I appreciate that. At this time, I'll open it up to public comment. If anybody has anything on this item, please come forward. Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will move on to item 6.4, our Environmental Utilities Department priority legislation. And I'll look up this time. We have our Government Relations Administrator, Noelle Maddock, and Mr. Bigley.
Yeah.
All right.
Good morning, Chairman Donza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. You've heard how many bills some of the other departments are tracking. This year is really ramping up to be a very busy year for us. I'm talking to some friends that we've been doing water issues for probably 20 years, and they've commented that in the water sector, this is the biggest year we've seen yet. With that, the Environmental Utilities Department has identified about 253 state legislative bills to review and track, and we're actively currently working on 26 bills. We do anticipate this number growing because, as we have seen, there's a lot of spot bills, which those are ideas that have been put in, but the real language hasn't been amended into them. With that, there are also several high-priority regulatory issues we're also tracking. We don't have those included in our presentation today, but we do anticipate bringing those forward at a future committee meeting. Today, I'm going to go over several state bills that we're actively working on and have positions on, and then provide an update on EU's federal funding requests. And then again, today, I'm joined by Assistant Director Sean Bigley, who will also provide the committee with an update on the current hydrology and water projects that we have going on. With that, I'm going to move forward to our first bill, which is AB 1572. And we do have a number of drought-related bills ranging from upending the water rights system in California to environmental protection as well as conservation. This measure, 1572, the water industry has actually been anticipating for the last couple of years. And effectively beginning in 2027, commercial, industrial, and municipal and multifamily properties would be prohibited from using potable water on what the bill defines as non-functional turf. This bill is similar to the current drought emergency regulations that we're currently operating under. However, it would make permanent, but also expand it to not only pertain to the commercial, industrial, and institutional, but also applied to the municipal and multifamily moving forward. We do have concerns with the definition of non-functional turf. It is not the same or similar enough to what is actually in the regulations that we're abiding by at this time. So staff has been working within working groups of our associations to create amendments for this bill for our associations to push forward. And we are also in the process of writing our opposed letter requesting specific amendments to the measure as well. The next measure is one of my favorite topics, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I said it right, which is commonly referred to as PFAS. You may have seen in the news over the last week that the US EPA has announced that they plan to set a new maximum contaminant level, which is what we refer to as an MCL, for PFAS in drinking water. As we've shared with this committee before as well, US EPA also moved forward with designating PFAS as a hazardous substance under what we call CERCLA, but it's actually the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. I prefer CERCLA. I will start off and say that in Roseville, we're really at the headwaters, so PFAS is not, in our drinking water, has not been an issue for us. Typically, it's introduced through products, through the wastewater stream. So we're very fortunate right now. However, we have been supportive of doing point source control. So wherever something is at the start of it, we try and control the issues there versus pushing it down onto our ratepayers to have to treat for and deal with these issues. You will see that we have taken a support position on AB 727, which would prohibit the use of PFAS in cleaning products. Several types of cleaning products are up there on the slide, but it does any home care, car care, and air fresheners, those types of things. On SB 414, this is dealing with our rebate programs for turf replacement. So we have a cash for grass. This would prohibit local agencies like Roseville from providing a rebate for folks participating in our cash for grass program if they want to use it for that artificial turf that contains PFAS, zinc, or plastic, which we're still figuring out what exactly that means, but it basically would prohibit use on any artificial turf. We have a watch position because we're working internally to figure out the impact that may have on our program for Cash for Grass, but also we have a preference for the bill, and usually bills take effect January 1 of the following year after they've been adopted. We would like to see this applied on a fiscal year. That way, during people participating in the program and applying, they don't have the standards changed on them midstream. The next issue is extended producer responsibility. And on July 10, the City of Roseville City Council adopted Resolution 10-278, which supports extended producer responsibility. We commonly refer to it as EPR, which is much easier. And what this policy approach does is it really makes responsible from cradle to grave the producers of products that they then sell and create. At this time, we have identified 12 measures so far dealing with EPR. Today, I'm going to cover just one, which is SB 707, which is a first-of-its-kind program. The bill actually pushes for the repair, reuse of products, textile products, and for those that cannot be reused, that they be collected and then recycled into fibers. This measure is sponsored by the California Product Stewardship Council, of which we are members of. And if passed, CalRecycle would be tasked with establishing the regulations, but not able to implement the program until the beginning of 2026. The next measure is AB 735. Roseville, along with other local agencies, are experiencing what we call a graying of our workforce, and attracting the next generation of civil service employees requires a concerted effort to educate the public on the various careers that are available within our governments. Environmental Utilities and Roseville Electric both provide both entry-level and more advanced professional career pathways for the vital services that we provide to the public. Looking at our workforce and the impeding retirements over the next decade, we have the need to invest in developing a pipeline for future employees that we can tap into to connect to great job career opportunities within the utility space. And lastly, I would like to cover our federal funding requests. Consistent with the 2023 legislative platform adopted by the City Council, as well as the EU priorities that we shared in our staff report last month, Environmental Utilities jointly submitted a community project funding request for our joint raw water conveyance project. You'll see some of the details up on this slide. Sean is going to be providing more detail on that project. So I will move on to the Barton Road Water Treatment Plant Solar Array and Battery Backup Resilience Project. This project actually came about due to a risk assessment that the Environmental Utilities Department did. And what we have seen as well is that PG&E's reliability indices has declined given the public safety power shutoffs, as well as wildfires, and then more recently with the extreme heat events where the state's been asking utilities to shed load. This project would provide a battery backup, so if power were ever to go out to the water treatment plant, we would be able to continue to treat and deliver our water to our customers. Really happy we were able to work with Robert Klein in the Economic Development Department to secure support letters from our local several businesses within the area, including Kaiser and Sutter. And then staff has also been able to secure support letters from Senator Nilo and Senator Assemblymember Joe Patterson. So we're anticipating that we should know by about April whether our request is going to be included in one of our federal officials' requests to the budget. We do have a meeting with Senator Feinstein's office today, as well as Congressman Kiley's office, to go over our requests. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
Oh, thanks, Noel. Just a couple questions. So on SB 414,
Yes.
does that mean that all artificial turfs have PFAS?
We don't know for sure, but everything that we've been seeing is that the artificial turf that's on the market does contain PFAS, zinc, or plastic.
Okay.
And again, it doesn't ban the use of it. It
Right.
only prohibits the use of the rebates for that.
Right. But it'll be interesting if they all do have that, if that's something cities can encourage use of. I don't know. But it seems like PFAS is in everything, too. So,
Yes, more than we realize.
yes. So just on AB 735, I think it's great, the initiative on the utility careers and partnering with high schools. I know the city is really good about outreach to our local high schools and doing certain days for them when they invite them in. So that's fantastic because they are really great jobs. And just best wishes for the funding request for Barton Road. And if there's anything that we can do, let us know.
Thank you. We do have a support letter from the city.
Okay,
So-
good.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I think the battery backup for the water treatment, that's a big deal. So that's very exciting. And we'll be watching that for sure. All right,
Great. Perfect.
Sean?
Well, good morning. Sean Bigley, I'm Assistant EU Director, and just want to spend some time today talking about hydrology as well as some other topics that I understand there was interest in going over today. So I'm going to actually just go through some charts that really kind of show where we're at with respect to hydrological results. We've seen 12 atmospheric rivers. We've seen a lot of rain, a lot of snow. And these charts definitely kind of show that progress, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So this first chart is a chart that demonstrates the 8-station index, the Northern 8-station index, and what the results are relative to rainfall. And this chart actually shows it relative to other years. So as you can see, some of the drier years back in 1976-77 are kind of on the bottom portion of that chart. And then as you go all the way up to that top line, which is that dark green line, that shows you one of the wetter years of record, 16, 17, and 82, 83. And there, embedded in all those squiggly lines, is a dark blue line. You'll see here it's current. And what it shows is that we are definitely trending towards close to breaking the 82-83 precipitation record. And we're continuing to see storm systems pile up, and we expect that to continue to go further. I just want to note on this chart, there's a kind of a shaded blue area. That shaded blue area represents sort of the average, what we see on an average basis. So if you look at the shaded blue in comparison to the dark blue squiggly line, we're definitely above average with respect to precipitation. So pretty significant results thus far. And the season's not over yet. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this graphic, what this graphic shows is it actually shows the snow water content. And there's actually 3 charts here. So the top chart's the northern part of the Sierra. The center one is the central part of the Sierra, and then obviously the bottom is the southern part of the Sierra. And so typically what we see in terms of our watershed is that would be reflected in the northern chart there. And as you can see, we are getting very close to breaking the snowfall record for 82-83. Next stop, if snow continues to occur, would be 1952 is the next record to break. It's a big gap between 82 and 83, but certainly this has been pretty unprecedented with respect to snowfall. I'll point out one thing on the bottom chart. That's actually the Southern California results thus far relative to snowpack. And this is pretty significant. There's a lot of concern with some of the flood control agencies, such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as well as other local flood control agencies, where they're really preparing for very significant snowmelt coming up in the next several months. In fact, we're probably going to see snowmelt occurring throughout the summer. Just because of the sheer quantity of snow that's actually up in the Sierra. So it's very significant, and there's going to be a lot of water that's going to be flowing down into reservoirs. And so you'll see reservoirs, they're going to be turning over several times, and they're going to be in flood control operations. Next slide, please. All right, so really what I want to kind of do is show kind of the bigger picture. As we're all aware, we have Folsom Reservoir, which is a Central Valley Project reservoir. Roseville receives its surface water supplies from that reservoir. And it's an integrated system, so it's a federal system, and it also works with the state water project, and those both of those systems are coordinated in terms of how they work together. So because what's important about this chart is that in terms of our allocation, Roseville's allocation for our CVP supply, oftentimes it's not just about the condition of Folsom Reservoir, which right now, condition of Folsom Reservoir is about 112% of normal. Oftentimes, what the federal agency Bureau of Reclamation looks at is the condition of Shasta Reservoir. And so that's one of the largest reservoirs really in the nation. And what the results are seeing thus far is that Shasta took a really long time to actually start to fill up. So in the beginning of the precipitation season, there wasn't a lot of snow and rain that was actually occurring up in the far northern part. And Shasta is actually mostly a rain-fed system versus Folsom, which is really snowmelt-fed system. So the good news on this chart is that we are actually seeing Shasta actually start to get to normal conditions, which is good. So we got our initial allocation from Bureau of Reclamation for Roseville's water supply, CVP water supply, and that was 75% of historic average. We have an update coming up actually next week with the Bureau of Reclamation on the allocation, and so fingers crossed, I'm hoping we get to 100% allocation for Roseville. So stay tuned. We'll of course keep you guys updated on what happens with that. Next slide, please. All right, so this is getting down into Folsom Reservoir. So Folsom Reservoir, again, what's occurring here is we're about 112% of normal for Folsom Reservoir. What you see again is that shaded area. That's the average fill rate for the reservoir. Top green line is reflective of that 82-83 season, which was a lot of water and snowmelt coming into the reservoir. You'll notice that there's a dip in the average and dip in all the numbers kind of during the months of December through about March. And what that's reflective of is that Folsom Reservoir's primary purpose, actually what it was authorized for by Congress originally, was for flood control. It's actually, that is the primary purpose of the reservoir. Water supply is secondary to the reservoir's authorized purpose. And so what we're seeing in terms of the operators at Reclamation, what they're doing is they're actually being pretty prudent, and they're actually allowing they're doing some releases for flood control because that's required by law. But what we're seeing is they're actually letting the reservoir rise up and kind of closely follow that curve, that authorized curve. So they're being pretty prudent in terms of that. They obviously have to follow the rules, but at the same time, they're really trying to maximize the water supply storage opportunities coming up. And so if you fast forward, some of the projections that we're looking at about May is it's going to get about 940,000 acre feet in the reservoir. Reservoir is about 970,000 acre feet. So they're about ready to fill it as of May. And that's, in addition to they're releasing water at the same time just to keep the flood control aspect under control. So, all right, so shifting over, want to talk a little bit about recharge operations. Understand there's some interest in that topic. So as of about 2 weeks ago, we now have 7 aquifer storage and recovery wells in our system. Those, again, are wells that have the ability to both extract water like a traditional groundwater well, but they can also recharge and essentially recharge the groundwater basin that underlies Roseville and the region. So since January, as of this year, we've been able to recharge about 700 acre feet of surface water into the groundwater basin. To put that into more terms that most folks can understand, it really equates to about 1,400 households worth of water for an entire year. So it's a significant amount of water. So we've been using 2 mechanisms. First, during January, we used what's called Article 3F, which is a reference to our repayment contract that we have with Reclamation that gives the Central California Area Office the authority to provide water, specifically during flood control operations where they consider that water unstorable. And then most recently, City Council approved a Section 215 water contract. And why that's significant is for a couple of reasons. So first, in the Section 215 water, that water is actually cheaper than the Article 3F water. So actually, Roseville got a benefit from a cost perspective by signing into that Section 215 water contract. And ultimately, what it also does is it provides a little bit more certainty in terms of year to year. The intent is Reclamation did a 5-year NEPA document for coverage. And what their intent is to re-up that Section 215 water contract each year. So I would think it was very beneficial for Roseville to go forward with that contract. Projects, next slide, please. So we continue to expand our ASR well system. Again, we have 7 ASR wells in the system now. We'll have 9 by 2025, and by 2027, we'll have 11 wells in the system as per what's currently planned. This is significant in terms of Roseville's long-term water supply reliability, but also this is in the midst of the Sacramento Regional Groundwater Bank, which is currently under development. This is led through the Regional Water Authority. They're in phase 2 of that project. They're working very closely with the Bureau of Reclamation. And essentially what that does is that the ultimate goal in that program is to get federal recognition of the groundwater bank, which would essentially allow CVP water to be used more flexibly within the region. And so, of course, based on Roseville's infrastructure and the fact that we do have a CVP contract, Roseville will be a significant party to that effort once that gets up and running. Next slide, please. All right. Noel had mentioned that we're working with Placer County Water Agency on a joint raw water conveyance project. Essentially what this does is if we look at historically what Folsom Reservoir and what we've seen in terms of 2014, 2015 is an example where there were fears about dead pool at the reservoir. And so we've been, staff has been working diligently to really look at what are some alternative ways that we can access existing water supplies. So we convey both our CVP water supply through the intake at Folsom Reservoir, but also we actually wheel our Placer County Water Agency Middle Fork Project water through the reservoir as well. So it's a vulnerability, and it's certainly what we want to do is we want to make sure we address that long term. And so what this project would do is essentially connect Placer County Water Agency's system up at their Foothill Water Treatment Plant up around Newcastle area. And basically the project would be a 3-phase project. Each phase is standalone. So each aspect of that project, once complete, will provide benefits. The project itself is a $95 million project. It'll probably take more than a decade to complete. What we are looking to do is to get the project 75% federally funded with a 25% match, and that match would be shared between the two agencies. We currently have a approved authorization for $21 million through the 2022 Water Resources Development Act. And as Noel indicated, we're actually also now moving on to trying to seek a $5 million appropriation, basically, to start first phases of that project. And finally, next slide is Sites Reservoir. And so just really quickly, in terms of where Sites Reservoir is, most of the funding for the $4.4 billion project has largely been secured. That's a combination of state funds, Proposition 1 funding, as well as WIFIA financing and also some federal financing or federal funding through reclamation. So that aspect has been largely covered. They're currently about to embark on water rights permitting. So that's a significant effort working with the State Water Board to get the project permitted from a water rights standpoint. Project is looking to break ground in 2025. And they project to have the project completed and operational by 2031. So we'll be here before we know it. This project does not provide direct water supply for Roseville, but there are indirect benefits, system benefits to the project once completed. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
I always learn so much hanging out with all the water guys. I don't even know where to start. Well, just maybe on the last thing that you said around sites, I think that many people think that there is a direct benefit to Roseville. So can you just explain that,
Sure.
the indirect benefits?
Yeah. So again, we're talking about an integrated system. And so I'll give you an example. So because of geography, when we have a situation where there's not a lot of surface water in the system, reclamation has to operate the system for multiple benefits. Specifically, a big driver in that is fish species and making sure there's sufficient cold water to be provided in rivers during certain times of year. So right now, what we see is a situation where oftentimes there are issues in the delta, either with temperature or there's too much salt coming into the Bay Delta. And oftentimes what they do is they lean on Folsom Reservoir to flush the system out or provide cold water. And the reason being is that water only takes a matter of hours to get there. If they did the same at Shasta Reservoir, it's about a 3 to 4 day transit time. So that creates obviously some tension in the current system. If you add a project like Sites into the system where it's integrated in the system, you have more water in the system, plus it gives the operators another way to be able to deal with things that occur in the Bay Delta. And so by default, what we project to see is that Folsom Reservoir would be less leaned on in terms of those water quality issues coming up. So that's really the key benefit for us. It's really no direct benefit in terms of water supply. It's more about making sure that that pressure is taken off Folsom ultimately.
Okay, so as I understand it, the water in Folsom Lake can stay in Folsom Lake. It doesn't-
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So back to one of the graphs that talk about the rainfall. If we can go back a few slides, it's just interesting because it feels like we have been told that we've been in a drought forever, but the reality is we're just playing catch up. I think from 2016. Where is it? One of the driest years. So I guess just being in our state too, what does that look like going forward? I mean, do you think that terminology of like drought for us will ever go away since we share our water? I mean, is this just part of life going forward? Because it seems like we don't ever have a time that we aren't in a drought yet, despite we've been, there's only been a few years of dry, if I'm reading that
Yeah.
right.
So the way I like to kind of break it up in my mind is that I think what you'll see definitely from a sort of a policy regulatory push in California. There's going to be a lot of discussion about drought kind of weaved in with climate change. I think that there's constantly going to be that push and that emphasis. I think legitimately for good reasons, and there's some other times that probably aren't really that justified. The way I see it in terms of our watershed, I look at it practically speaking in terms of where the water supply is, what the watershed looks like mostly from a snowpack perspective. And, I think that in terms of the best way to view it and how we look at it is we're primarily going to look at, what does our water supply situation look like? What are our allocations with snowpack, et cetera, et cetera. And, based on that, there isn't really a drought occurring at this point in time in our watershed. And that's, I think, what's most important. But when we get down the road and we're talking about, what does Roseville locally do, a lot of what we locally do, unfortunately, is going to be controlled by the governor's executive orders, existing emergency regulations that are already in play. So if you fast forward, as staff, we're going to have to provide a recommendation to the city manager with respect to local actions here in Roseville. And so we're going to take all that into play, right? So what's in the regulatory space, what's the reality on the ground with respect to our condition, and then try to figure out, what's the most reasonable way to go forward and still be in compliance with the state law. So.
And just remind me, when water is charged, and I know this terminology is not accurate, but when it's into the ground and then it's time for us to pump it back up, is there, deposits withdrawal tracking? Remind me of that system. So
Yeah.
Are we only allowed to take out what we pump in?
So the idea is, we're part of the Western Placer Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So that's now, basically monitored. And yeah, the idea is essentially that when you put in a quantity for recharge, you always want to, just by good practice, you always want to leave a little bit in behind, right? So we're always trying to kind of move the needle in terms of making sure that we keep the groundwater level actually increasing over time. I'm not talking about leaving a lot of water in, maybe 5 to 10%, but that over time aggregates into a much more healthy groundwater basin. And as a matter of pride, our region has done a really good job in terms of maintaining a sustainable groundwater basin. It's not true in the rest of the state, as we all know. There's a lot of issues with overdraft and things like that. So, but yeah, we're very purposeful in making sure that we're adding benefit over time through recharge.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great slides. I love the visual presentation. It was nice to see on the one slide that was just popped up here a few minutes ago, the result of the 7 atmospheric rivers that we've had. I mean, we've all been complaining about the rain, but when you see it on a chart like that, and you see we're close to breaking that, was it 1912, 1913, or 1918?
Close to 82, 83.
82, 83?
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and just to see the amount of water, that's, you see it when you're dealing with it, but to see it on a graph like that really hits it home. And it was nice to also see too how our aquifers, how our groundwater storage, how that's going. I feel like you guys are getting off easy today because, if Mayor Howeshout was here, this would be a 15-minute conversation on water. I mean, it'd be like the lightning round. So you guys are definitely getting off easier today. Before I open it up for public comment afterwards, do you have any closing remarks, Mark?
No, other than the next meeting is on Thursday, April 27th at 9 a.m.
Awesome. All right, I'll open it up for the last and final public comments on this item. Seeing none, I will close public comment. As Mark indicated, our next meeting will be on April 27th, and we stand adjourned until that time. Thank you very much.
I hope you could hear over my stomach growling.